You are listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda, hosted by two teachers who break down a different propaganda song each episode. Today we're talking about the title track from 2001's Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, the third track on the record. This is our second episode about Today's Empires, and we last talked about this album with John Darnielle of the Mountain Goats, who helped us break down Back to the Motor League.
Which was such an amazing conversation back with John. That episode is super popular, so thank you to everybody who has checked that one out. If you missed it, you are missing out. So since we're talking about the title track of Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, I thought that it would be useful to begin this episode with a quote from Mumia Abu-Jamal, who said something that is like essentially where the title of this album comes from. So here's the quote in full. Contrary to popular belief, conventional wisdom would have one believe that it is insane to resist this, the mightiest of empires. But what history really shows is that today's empire is tomorrow's ashes, that nothing lasts forever, and that to not resist is to acquiesce in your own oppression. The greatest form of sanity that anyone can exercise is to resist that force that is trying to repress, oppress, and fight down the human spirit. Which is such a cool quote. I love it.
Greg, tell me about the guests for this episode.
So this is an action-packed episode, and I sort of am sorry, not sorry to guests for the extended nature of this episode. I know this is probably a long one, but we have two guest interviews and an honorary third guest. So our first guest is Ian Legge. He's known online as the Punk Cellist. And a lot of folks are well aware of Ian's recent work covering Propaganda's Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes with Emilie Plamondon, who can be followed on Instagram, Emilie, at punk_rockette. And that'll be linked in the show notes. So you should definitely follow Emilie's work. She does amazing covers. And in my conversation with Ian Legge, we discussed the adaptation process of modifying a tune like Today's Empires to be performed on multiple cello tracks. So Ian and I talked writing, demoing, tracking, and his collaboration that he did with Emilie, where they performed this song as a cello and a vocal. So if anyone hasn't followed Ian on Instagram at the Punk Cellist or on Patreon at the Punk Cellist, you totally should. He did a recent cover of a Menzinger song that was absolutely wonderful, and I know that he's working super hard on tons of fantastic punk rock adaptations on his cello. So following Ian's interview with me, you will get to hear the full performance of Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, featuring Emilie and Ian. So that's the first one, is Emilie and Ian. But the second one is the marvelous Frank Turner, who is on the show. Frank is super well known around the world. He recently released a split album with No Effects called Wessex versus the West Coast. But my favorite personal Frank Turner records are England Keep My Bones and his latest record, No Man's Land, both of which are fantastic. And I've seen Frank a whole bunch of times over the years. I saw him in the UK, where I saw him open up for the Gaslight Anthem in Brighton on the Brighton shoreline. I saw him in Missouri at the Blue Note in Columbia, Missouri several times. I've seen him in Canada, and I've been a fan of Frank's since his fabulous Love Iron song LP. And when I reached out to Frank, I half expected him to choose State Lottery as his episode because he has covered it periodically at his live shows over the years, which you can find on YouTube in like 2 seconds if you search for him. But Frank chose Today's Empires, and I'm so glad that he did. So Frank and I had a real blast on the show. So in this episode, you will hear my chat with Ian Legge, the Punk Cellist, for about 20 minutes. And then you'll hear his full cello rendition of Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes. And then you will hear my chat with Frank Turner for about 30 minutes. And then Keith and I, you and I will be back for our ordinary end of show geek out. So sit back, relax, or take your dog for a walk and enjoy my chats with Ian Legge, the Punk Cellist, and Frank Turner. We'll be back in just a bit.
Built into these borders.
Ian Legge, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda.
Thank you very much for having me.
We're delighted to have you. Can you spend a moment and introduce yourself for the audience? Maybe tell them a little bit about the body of work that you do.
Sure. So I've been known on social media as the Punk Cellist for a little while now.
Heck yeah, man.
It's a fun project that I started just sort of, in my bedroom, just having a lot of fun. And so I'm basically Berkeley grad. I saw a lot of my Berkeley friends actually using this app called Acapella, and it stacks like videos so you can basically, track with yourself. And so that's what I did for a little while, started just doing any old song, and then started getting into more punk covers, and the rest is history.
What are some of your most famous or most thoroughly viewed songs that you've done?
I would say the most recent ones probably, which are Burn After Writing by the Menzingers.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did a cover by Propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
We did Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes with I did that with my friend Emilie Plamondon. She's from Quebec. Those two I think have really taken off recently. And also I did a cover of a Lawrence Arms song called The Revisionist, and that really was one of my favorites. That's one of my favorite songs like ever. I think, man. They just wrote such an incredible record, and the new one that came out recently is also pretty tight.
Yeah, my LP actually arrived in the mail yesterday, 8 days after the release of the record. Apparently, Kings Road got snagged up, but I finally got it. So I'm delighted to dig into that a lot more as well. So, Ian, I'm curious, what came first, the cello or the punk rock?
For me, it was definitely the cello. I started in fourth grade. When I was about 10 years old. And at that point, I think I was still listening to the bands such as NSYNC and Backstreet Boys. So
heck yeah, man. Nice. How did that progression go for you? Were you like a natural on the cello? Did you take to it quickly? Did you, dive in and out of any other instruments when you were younger?
Yeah, so I played drums as well, and sort of learned both at the same time, classically for cello, and then just by myself on drums. I would just listen to like Blink-182 and stuff and just learn how to play those songs like on my headphones in my basement, and just it basically kind of came together when I met my good friend Meyer Brown, who was the bass player of my band at the time called Half-Hearted Hero.
Mm-hmm.
And we met because he played stand-up bass and I played cello, and we just ended up talking and realized that we both liked punk rock, so we ended up jamming. And yeah, we ended up having a couple friends who joined up with us, and that's really where the punk rock came into my life, because Meyer showed me so much music that I love so much today, including Propaganda. So we did that, played in that band for 10 years. More than that, really. We did, European tour, Japan tour.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. We played with the Swellers plenty of times.
What
Good
in the
friends
world?
with Jono and Nick. And yeah, it was a good time for sure. We sort of just disbanded. Our singer moved to California. So unfortunately, we aren't really playing anymore. And so that really gave me the opportunity to start doing things more solo. So that's when I started taking this more seriously.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to have to go back and find your other band too, because I was completely unaware of that. So I love finding new music. So I'm going to find out anything that you guys have out. Half-Hearted Hero, you said?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to go and check it out, dude. That's fantastic. So when did you sort of like realize that, playing cello and like playing punk rock music didn't have to be like separate? When did those things come together?
I think it was actually in late middle school, early high school. I was actually going to quit the cello. I was sort of bored with it. I was playing only classical music with it.
Yeah.
I did enjoy it. Playing in chamber groups and stuff like that is something that I really have always enjoyed. It's a bit more individualistic of playing rather than, sitting in an orchestra and just sort of like following the conductor as much. So then I heard of Apocalyptica.
Oh, yes. Awesome.
And two cellos too. They came later. But when I realized that you could fully orchestrate a Metallica song for cellos without any drums, without any guitar, anything else, I was like, dude, this is it. I was completely re-inspired and jumped right back in. And so it did take me a while, I think, until I got better with recording and then found that acapella app, which made things really easy just to stack and record audio and video at the same time. Anyways, that brought about, okay, what songs have I not heard arranged yet? And it's like, okay, all my favorite punk songs, so
it's like capturing a lightning in a bottle in that moment. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I was totally just driven to do any song that I could think of at that point. And, I was releasing almost daily covers when I had more time. Now things are a bit busier. I'm back in school. So, and I want to produce higher quality videos, like full length stuff. So I try and release, a few a month.
Awesome. Did you ever like any bands that were like sort of tangentially attached to the punk scene who had like full-time cello members in their band? Like I'm thinking like Cursive or Murder by Death, bands like that.
So I definitely loved Cursive, sort of as an offshoot because they had toured with Propaganda, and I haven't really delved into their music as much because I listened to more like straight up punk, straight up like hardcore, because that's the scene that I grew up in. And then also like straight up classical stuff too. And that's where I think I'm coming from with my arrangements, is purely a classical idea, right? It's all like no drums, nothing else but strings. And the way that the cello is set up, it works perfectly to translate it to like power chords, especially.
Awesome. Well, okay, so let's dive into this cover here that you and Emilie Plamondon did recently for today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes. So you're on cello, backing vocals. Emilie's on lead vocals. I'm sure that many people listening have seen it. It's gone pretty widespread. I think I've watched it personally like 10 or 15 times at this point. How did that collaboration come about?
So when I started making these covers, thank you, by the way.
You're welcome.
Really glad you like it.
Love it.
It's been, such a fun process. And as I started making more and more covers, more and more people started to, just messaging me and asking, hey, would you consider doing collaborations? And I've never really considered putting vocals over these cello covers, right? But I thought, I've heard Emilie's other performances with, acoustic instruments and stuff, and I think that her voice goes really well. So I said, hey, let's give it a shot. And I thought, the end product was amazing. And I think we might be doing some covers in the future again. And,
awesome.
and there will be other covers, like collaborations, coming in the future too, which I'm really excited about. I can't wait to be able to give a little more information in that regard.
So just in case people want to know right off the bat, we can just talk about this right now, but before saving it for the end, you can say where you're posting these. Like, I know you might have a Patreon, an Instagram. Like, where are you putting these covers up when you put them up?
Totally. So I post the full length covers to YouTube so everyone can see them there. And then if they want to own the actual audio file, like the high quality one, so that, it sounds great, then you can go to my Patreon account, and at the $3 tier, you can get all of the audio files that I've done, that I've been able to upload to my Google Drive, which is about 10 full-length ones right now. So
Nice.
and it's always growing. So
Don't you have like audience participation as well on the Patreon? Like people are allowed to like request things if they're a patron and things like that.
yeah, so the next tier, the $5 tier, is exactly that. So you get everything, and you're able to request a few songs a month. And also, if you need help with any kind of sheet music writing, or if you
Wow.
want one of the pieces of sheet music for the covers that I've done, I can chart that out.
Okay, let's dive in more into that right now. Let's talk about the adaptation process that you go through for creating these thorough, in-depth, multi-track, high-quality covers on the cello. I want to know a little bit about your drafting process. Like before you put anything down on a recording, like what is the planning like before demoing? What's the planning like?
It's actually really funny and simple. I'll typically just run the song, um, playing the power chords, trying to hear just the chords underneath it all. And then I'll sing the vocal melody typically along with it. Pretty poorly, might I add.
You kind of like hum it, like
Yeah, especially if I don't know the lyrics like fully. Yeah, I'm just like yeah.
nice.
So, and then you just start fleshing it out from there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So during the recording process, I try and actually record it like a rock recording would be recorded. So
Mm-hmm.
you have the guitars tracks panned hard left right,
Yeah.
and then anything that's like lead based is closer to the middle, and then you have your vocals or your lead your vocal tracks right in the center. So that can span from 8 to 16 tracks in total, just for everything to sound good, and to fill out all the parts that I hear, because
Awesome.
typically it's all by ear.
Awesome.
So
Can you
it may
tell
not
me,
be perfect.
like, what's like the specific the tracks that went into today's Empires Tomorrow's Ashes adaptation? Like, how many tracks and what are they? Like, if we were looking at your Pro Tools screen
Yep.
or whatever you're recording on, how many tracks are there, and what are those tracks representing?
Okay, so we have like guitar left, guitar right, which is going to be me playing. So the cello is set up in such a great way that each string is tuned to fifths, so that when you're playing like on a guitar or power chord, all I have to do is bar it. So what I
Mm-hmm.
do is you able to bar the chords on, and then you fill in like thirds or ninths or whatever's above that they do, and then I'll have two guitar lead tracks that are like, so like right in the beginning of the song, it's
Mm-hmm.
da-ga-da-ga-down,
Yeah.
da-da-da-da-da, right? So I wanted to make sure I had that come in. So that's actually its own separate little lead track coming in above. So that's anything that the guitars are doing, like in the bridge, when it's um, down, but on a corner of the down, customary. So all of that is its own tracks too. So I make sure to add what I can hear. I'm not sure if did they do a book
I don't think they've done this
for
one yet.
that
I don't
album.
think they've done Empires yet.
Yeah. So I would love to get all the details, but I did what I could basically. And then I have like a Chris track, and
Mm-hmm.
I have a Todd track for the harmonies.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm actually tracking like vocals on cello, if I want to do that. I'm actually doing a cello only version of today's Empires too, just to have it, because I know
Okay.
people just love the cello only. So both of those will be available for download on the Patreon. So
Awesome. So how much like demoing does this take? Like how much time do you need to get to the finished version with sometimes 12 to 16 tracks overlapping each other?
I would say hour wise, it can take me from anywhere from about from arranging it to recording it to mixing it, probably close to like 15 hours or so, sometimes 10 to 15 hours,
Yeah.
to really make sure everything sounds great and that I'm happy with the final product. And I actually have been using a mastering tool called Master. which
Mhm.
is produced by Jay Moss.
Oh, cool.
He's a great recording engineer that has actually recorded my punk band multiple times, and it's a mastering algorithm that basically just can give you a great idea. I mean, it produces high quality masters, and it's the best part is that it's fast, so
Yeah.
I can sort of mix it, test it, and then run that a few times to really get used to that. Because for me, the recording process is still a work in progress.
I tell you what, man, I'm really glad that you mentioned the time spent on doing digital content like this because, for me and Keith to do this show, I sometimes will send 10 or 15 emails in a day. I'm going through managers sometimes to help reach people who I'm going to have on the show. We have to painstakingly put together the episode audio tracks and snip out all like little screw ups and things like that. So to put out one episode, and our episodes are long too, so you put out an hour and a half long episode,
Yeah,
probably 20 hours of work went into that just to make a
easy.
podcast episode that we're not even like trying to like make money from. We're just doing it because we want to.
Right.
But it's like, it's wild how much time and energy and thought goes into making digital content like this. And I think that's something that's often overlooked as well. And I think that's definitely overlooked for people who are making music. People are like, they get an MP3 and they can't see it or hold it or touch it. So it's like expendable, right? But the amount of labor that goes into that is intense.
Absolutely. And I think now that there's Twitch and there's TikTok and there's all these ways to see the process happen,
Mm-hmm.
it really makes people appreciate it that much more.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you said that though, because it's just it's a huge amount of effort, and I love doing it, and I know that you do too. It's just I like it when people know what goes into this, because it helps them appreciate it to a little bit deeper of a level. Can you tell me a little bit more about like the key of today's empires, or any like meticulous or any kind of like musical minutia that you think is interesting that you feel like people should know?
Ah, oh man, I feel like just all of the guitar stuff in that song, everything happening in the background. Um, because one thing that I always notice when I jump into listening to this song in particular is I get lost in the lyrics
Mm,
immediately, right? They're so forward and they're so powerful that I'm always realizing, oh, I forgot to listen to what the guitars are doing for
yeah.
like 30 seconds of the song. So um, I say to all the listeners, go in again and just really try and listen to each, even take one ear off so you can
Mm.
listen to one guitar at a time. And they're doing incredible leads in there. And it's just like, it does get lost, but with how they record now, you hear everything. And their guitar work has just been getting better, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Do you know how many like drafts you went through before you had this one right? Like, do you have like a bunch of like versions saved on your computer before you felt like you had nailed it?
Oh, yeah, I probably remixed this song like 2 or 3 separate times. Like big EQing, re-EQing everything, just like, oh man, I don't like. So also, yeah, a part of it was that I was using a cello that I was renting, because during the recording of one of the Lawrence Arms tracks, I
Mm-hmm.
actually broke my cello of 10 years.
Oh,
And so I had just scrambled for a rental. It was like it was like a $50 a month rental. It was not very much.
yeah.
But thanks to my Patreon peeps,
Woo!
this puppy right here, this is way nicer. So trying to EQ the cello during the Today's Empires was actually a really big challenge. I had to re-EQ that thing probably like the mixing was one thing, but the re-EQing that I did was probably like 6 or 7 different times.
Is it just because the instrument like wasn't up to this like a level that you were hoping to play through?
Yeah, unfortunately, it was like sawing into a piece of cardboard. So
Oh man. Well, that's really interesting as well about the quality of instruments that come through, and just the the wide variation of playability within instruments is insane. Can you say anything about that, like about the like cello like quality and how that varies as well?
Yeah, so I actually teach private music lessons, and I have a lot of beginners. And one of my biggest things is having the parents get them a decent instrument right away, because the playability of those, Amazon instruments is just, you're going to discourage your kid, because it's so difficult to play. It sounds terrible. It's just an overall bad time. So,
And you're just not going to have fun as well.
yeah, seriously. If you play an instrument that feels good, you're going to feel good, right?
Yeah, totally.
So,
It's going to make you feel like you're actually making progress instead of like
Mhm.
screeching your way through your instrument. Like whenever I was in elementary school, I was doing the Suzuki method and all the plucking and stuff and just sound like total garbage. I was like, this is horrible. I love it. All right. Well, Ian, how does the Empire's track adaptation that you did rank as far as like the challenging nature of the songs you've adapted? Is this like did this push you a little bit as a player?
Absolutely. I would say challenged me as a listener. It challenged me as a player. And, I would say it wasn't a particularly shreddy song. There were
Mhm.
there's no guitar solos in this song. There's no like leads or anything like that are particularly like out there. I think this is such a great melodic song. And I think just this particular adaptation, with Emilie a part of it, just is honestly very special. I didn't expect it to turn out the way that it did. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, Ian, remind the listeners one more time where they can find all of your fantastic work, and then they can, check it out from there.
Yeah. So check me out on all the social medias at the Punk Cellist, and you can find me on YouTube at the same, and also the Patreon link is patreon.com/the Punk Cellist.
Awesome. Well, Ian Legge, thank you so much for coming on Unscripted Moments. It's been a real pleasure having you here to talk about this fantastic cover that you and Emilie Plamondon did for, all the listeners out there who love this band as much as we do.
Thank you so much, Greg. It's been a pleasure.
They were memories, but from by your ruby rings, by your shades of feet, I'm not against the sin. I could have buried up the rhythm, commissaries and prayers, run on his face, and seen of common faggot of legs. Never ticks off, gets hammered down, monsters finest, his finest jewels are found. Sad John classic, a music cacophony of screaming billboards, and days of fight history. Sometimes it dies down, but it's strange that justice shines upon the cemetery plots marked and time weaver anime where federal bureaus pretend all others have cast their shadows, permanent features built into these borders. But under cover of the customary gap we find between history and truth, founding fathers, basking the rockets, blinding red glare, the bones bursting in here, one nation indivisible. But the truth is, backcountry learned of ratification. People are fucking being blind. Blindly born in funeral position, buried it deep in the earth. Never more than disillusion, torment of their public liberty. Someday, somewhere, to these empires, tomorrow's ashes.
one. Matt here in Arizona, massive Propaganda fan, the best band on the planet in my opinion. I first heard them when I was like 13, cruising around on my skateboard when my buddy took his Walkman out and made me listen to Anti-Manifesto. I just think every record's progressively better than the last one. A couple of my favorite songs are Ladies Night in Loserville and Back to the Motor League. Love the podcast, love what you guys are doing, and I really can't wait to listen to more. Okay, that's it. Bye.
But the truth is, the backcountry learned of ratification. The people that are coffin painted black.
Frank Turner, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda.
Thank you for having me. It's very nice to be here.
I'm delighted to have you. How did you find propaganda? What's the origin story of your interest in this band?
I think my answer to this question is going to be one that you're going to encounter more than once, which is Fat Records comps.
Oh, cool.
Or Epitaph comps. I can't quite remember which it was, but those. I have a theory that you can date people of a certain demographic quite accurately by which of those compilations is the most important. You know what I mean? It's just like they were just huge. They made an enormous impact on the music scene and on my life and on my taste in music. And I distinctly remember. I'm pretty sure it was Fat Records. They had Nation States.
Yeah,
was on there. And it was just kind of, sorry, say.
I believe it was the Survival of the Fattest compilation.
Survival of the Fattest, that's the one, yeah. And it was just kind of like staggering to me when I heard it because, you know, I was interested in punk rock. I was interested in the sort of pop punk end and punk rock, but I was also interested in anarchism and that kind of thing as well. And, you know, I was into The Clash and I was into sort of Black Flag. And there's a lot of kind of political bands who aren't as eloquent as propaganda, should we say. And we'll obviously get into that in more detail, but it was just like to go from kind of like somebody singing, you know, smash the system, fuck the government, to opening a song with publicly subsidized, privately profitable, the anthem of the upper tier, puppeteer, untouchable. It was just like, who the fuck is this?
Oh,
like,
yeah,
this
man.
is my, like, almost instantly it was like, this is my new favorite band. There we go, done. And, you know, it was just so simple, so obvious that this band was going to like blow my mind in a long-term way.
Yeah. So, you know, jumping off from that compilation, how did you realize that they were really super special? Like, what was your trajectory for exploring their catalog after you heard that first track?
I think I'm right in saying that I went and got a copy of How to Clean Everything, and I have to say, and this might be an unpopular opinion in some quarters, but it's not my favorite propaganda record.
We agree.
And the reason for that is all of the kind of like comedy stuff. And it was slightly disappointing to me that this band that had been so like militantly eloquent was suddenly kind of, there was sort of, I mean, it's not quite dick and fart jokes like Blink-182 or whatever, but it's not a million miles away from that either. And it was just like, well, hold on a minute, this isn't what I signed up for. Do you know what I mean? It was like, I came here for the like the furious eloquence, like what happened to that. And then you know, I feel like they as a band kind of evolved. I mean, I'm guessing here, but I'm feeling like they as a band kind of evolved out of that pretty quickly. And you know, there's a lot of great stuff. Anti-Manifesto is one of their best songs, you know. And there's a lot of good stuff on that first record, but I just sort of found some of it to be slightly kind of you know, it sort of made me slightly grit my teeth, should we say? Because it wasn't quite what I was looking for from propaganda. So, and then I got Less Talk More Rock, and I thought that was amazing, and still do, I should add. And you know, that was kind of around the time that was around the time Less Talk More Rock came out, and as I'm sure you know, there was then kind of, I'm not quite sure if they went on hiatus, but they didn't do anything for quite a long time. Right. So I had those two records. I love those two records. They were a huge part of my life and of my listening diet. But they also didn't tour the UK at any point during that particular period of time. So it was slightly kind of, academic maybe. Do you know what I mean? It was like, this band is great. I'm never going to see them live.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly how we felt in the US too, because there was that lull leading up to Today's Empires where they were really super busy with G7 Welcoming Committee, their record label. And we were just like, when is propaganda going to come to the US? And it was an obsession seeing them live. And we're like, they just don't care about their fans. And, you know, we were moaning and complaining about it for years and years before we finally got to see them. Totally understand.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing is, I'm sure that they would probably kind of like, look askance at the word fan anyway. I'm not sure that's how they operate as a band, which I have a lot of sympathy with. I mean, in my own career, it's a word that I shy away from using if I can possibly avoid it, because it smells of Marie Antoinette to me.
So Frank, how have you ever communicated with the band? Is there any? I know that like back in the day, you would write letters and all kinds of stuff. You ever done that?
Yeah, well, funnily enough, my email address is public domain. It's on my website. People can hit me up whenever they want, and I will reply. And there's a number of reasons I do that. People tell me that it's unusual or weird or whatever. And to be honest, in my musical world, it really isn't particularly. And it comes from the fact that when I was a teenager, I sent one letter and two emails that all got replies. And the emails I sent an email to Henry Rollins, and he wrote back to me when I was like 15 or something.
Sweet.
When I was about 17, I had a zine, and I sent some questions to Fugazi just as a Hail Mary, and Guy Picciotto replied and answered all my questions for a zine interview, which was incredible for me. But the other one, and this was earlier, when I was probably about 14, maybe 15, I wrote Propaganda a letter. And I had a bunch of questions. You know, I was extremely discombobulated and alienated. I was getting into anarchism and punk rock, and I'd been shipped off to a boarding school, and I hated it. So, you know, it was a very strange time in my life. And I wrote all these kind of very adolescent questions about, like, you know, how do we escape, and what's the meaning, and how do we smash the system, and all this kind of thing. And I didn't hear back until about 3 months later, but then I got a letter in the mail that had the same handwriting that is in the sleeve to How to Clean Everything. And I picked up the letter and started shaking. It was like, oh my God. And Chris wrote me like an 8-page reply written on the back of Canadian grindcore flyers. And I still have it somewhere. It was a really kind of life-changing moment for me.
Awesome. Well, Frank, if you ever dig that out, be sure to put it on Instagram or something and tag me, because I would freaking love to see it.
The issue I have with that is that my side of the correspondence is probably the lamest thing of all time.
Oh, but you're a kid. You know, you're a kid. Yeah. It's the way it goes. Everybody has to find their way.
Yeah, it's true.
When did you get to see them live? Have you seen them live?
I've seen them live many times, yeah.
Okay.
And in fact, that brings us on to the next part of the story, which will bring us around to the song that I've chosen to talk about today. Essentially, the thing that happened was that the song Back to the Motor League kind of emerged somewhere. Mm-hmm. I want to say it was like online. And it was kind of like
file sharing.
Yeah, and it was kind of like one of the first times anyone had ever really done that, as far as I can remember. And that was kind of interesting. And it was like, oh my goodness, there's new Propaganda. That's exciting. And then what I love that song very much because it was kind of an introduction to a new era of Propaganda, but specifically it was kind of such a kind of fuck you to the boring, staid, you know, arguably conservative parts of the punk scene. Mm-hmm. And to come back after that long of being away with a statement that was so uncompromising, because it was a pretty straight fuck you to almost all of the existing punk scene, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was just kind of like, holy shit, they're back. And the other thing about it, of course, was that John Kay had left the band and been replaced by Todd. And I was and indeed am a Swallowing Shit fan, so I knew who he was. Yeah. And I thought it was kind of interesting that he, of all people, had joined the band. Also, you know, the Weaker Thans are a contender for my favorite band of all time. Mm-hmm. So whilst I am an atheist, an argument for the existence of a higher power might be that, like, you know, that was perfect. John left and formed the Weaker Thans, who were incredible, and then Todd joined, and not only, you know, is he brilliant in his own right, but like it just added another layer to the Propaganda thing, you know, that kind of slightly grindcore edge to it. Yes. Which really brought something new to the table and kind of really cleaned the decks on the comedy parts of it as well. Do you know what I mean? That seems to me to be the point where they really ditched all that stuff, which I was very much in favor of. And you know, so that song was kind of the introduction, and then the album came out, and it's easily my favorite Propaganda record. Partly because it was this kind of like confirmation of my faith in that band up to that point, you know, almost with the benefit of hindsight, I'd say that like I loved them before that point, but I was kind of waiting for them to bloom, you know what I mean? And to kind of be as good as I believed that they could be. And then they finally did with that record. And it was like, cool, I wasn't wrong to put my faith in this band. But also that was the first time they toured in the UK, and I went to see their first UK show. Well, in fact, I'm not 100% sure if it was their first UK show, but it was the first UK show that happened in a long time, and certainly since I'd ever heard of them. And it was at a venue called the LA2, which is no longer there. And me and all my friends went, and I remember just kind of, there was an interesting divide in the crowd because there were definitely some people who were only there for songs from the first two record and weren't that interested in the new stuff. And were kind of, play Scar Sucks or whatever, which I think is a terrible song, by the way.
Indeed, yeah.
And you could see, and I think they did play it and kind of grudgingly towards the end of the show. But for it was kind of it was a sorting the wheat from the chaff moment, because some of us were definitely kind of like, oh, you don't need to play that song, fuck that song, play the new shit. That's why we're here, because it's a whole new level of aggression and focus and intelligence.
Yeah, nice. Have you seen Propaganda in the UK a bunch more times since then? Because I remember seeing them in 2009 at the Islington Academy.
I was there.
Oh my God, really? That was a great show. Random Hand opened up.
Yeah, I remember.
Oh my God!
So well, yeah, I was in the audience. In fact, one of my memories. This is kind of a sidetrack for this, but there was a moment that night where I had a real moment of realizing that I was getting older, which was simply that. I mean, first of all, just the context. So what happened was, like, I went down with the two guys I was in my first touring band with, a band called Knee Jerk. And we don't hang out that much anymore because we all kind of moved on and live our lives and stuff. But we all went down to meet up for Propaganda. And then we all had our significant others with us. And all of our significant others were not punk fans and not Propaganda fans. Kind of thing.
Nice.
And the three of us did that utterly shitty cliche thing of basically sort of asking our partners to hold our coats while we went into the pit, kind of thing. And we went down into the pit, and the three of us lasted about 30 seconds before we were all like, oh my God, I'm so tired, I'm so old, why the fuck am I in a pit, Jesus Christ, get me out of here. And then went back and stood with our partners and enjoyed the show, and it was great. But like I say, I reckon I was in the pit for about 30 seconds that night.
That is so awesome. I'm so glad I was in the room with you for that show as fans. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because, like, I've seen you play live a ton of times, and, to be in the crowd with you as a fan, even though it was like 11 years ago, like, that just gives me delight to no end.
Well, thank you. I mean, I like this. Again, this is a sideline to what we're talking about, but I mean, there's no better place. I hate watching a show from the side of the stage. It's a shit place to show from. The problem I have at my own, like, headline shows, I often want to go and watch the support band from the audience, but it's generally kind of a strategically terrible idea. Nevertheless, the intention is there.
Yeah. So I know you've covered Propaganda a bunch in your own live sets over the years. Like, what have you covered, and why did you do those tunes?
I covered State Lottery, early doors. I mean, a big part of the reason why I did a lot of covers in the early days, I didn't have that many songs that I'd written myself, because I was just starting out as a solo artist. And, I would cover sort of Neil Young and Leonard Cohen and stuff like that. But it was kind of cool to, keep a foot in the punk world as well. And it certainly set me apart from a lot of people on the quote unquote folk scene. Nobody else was doing NoFX and Propaganda covers at those kinds of shows at that period of time, so that was kind of fun. And I mean, that was a song. That song works well because it's a very simple song, and it can therefore be translated into a kind of a fingerpick number pretty easily. I think that some of their more recent material would be more challenging to translate in that context. You know what I mean? Yeah,
for sure. All right, so Frank, let's get into a song here. So when we reached out to you to talk about having you on the show as a guest, you mentioned Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes LP is far and away your favorite record by Propaganda. You just said that a few minutes ago as well. Can you tell me a little bit about, in the big picture, like, what this LP means to you as like a statement from this band?
Well, I think the thing I would say to that is that, like, I have a bit of a theory about Propaganda as a band as a graph. Right, I'm a big fan of graphs, so bear with me. But like if one line, you've got kind of amount on the up of the y-axis and time on the x-axis. And one of the lines is kind of like sort of melody, and the other one is technicality. And I'm not saying they're less melodic these days, but I feel like they had sort of allowed themselves more kind of like choruses, should we say, at a certain point in time. And the technical and I want to say technical thrash. I think that is the right term. The technical thrash side of their music started as a pretty negligible component and then has increased over time. And then more recent records are pretty solidly melodic technical thrash. And that's fine and that's cool and that's legit. But I think that for me, my favorite moment was on Today's Empires, because that was the moment where the two lines intersected. So it still had the kind of shiny big choruses and melodic hooks and that kind of thing front and center, but it also had this kind of level of technicality to it, which was not only, I mean, impressive. I mean, who gives a shit about being impressed by music? But like, it was unique and it was well done and it was powerful, you know. And nobody else. I mean, I think it's still true that nobody else really does it the way they do it, you know.
Yeah.
But it was so cool, and the song "Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes" is quite a good example of it, in the sense that like it's technical and as hell, you know. It's like stop on a dime, super nerdy techie thrash, but it's also got just gigantic melody and chorus in it, and that's my sweet spot for that band.
Awesome. So you did specifically mention Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes as being like your massive standout track, and I know you also love Back to the Motor League as well.
I mean, in fairness, I kind of love all of it, if I'm being honest with you. Like, it's really a record where I don't feel that there are many weak tracks. Natural Disasters is still an excellent fucking song. And what's the one? There's one towards the end where it's like, we never leave anyone behind.
Oh my God. Yeah. Is that, oh my God. I'm totally spacing on the title now. I just listened to the record the other day. It's so amazing how and you know, Keith and I talk about this all the time, how on this record specifically, Todd and Chris go back and forth in their vocal lines a lot, especially within the middle of the record.
Yes, definitely.
And that is so interesting.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I think that Todd brings in a different flavor. I feel like, you know, and when John was in the band, it was definitely, there were John songs, quite a few of which ended up actually being Weaker Than songs. Yeah. Whereas I feel like Todd is more kind of enmeshed in the overall project. Do you know what I mean?
For sure.
Like, it sort of feels like when he's singing, it's like it's not just kind of this extra thing that they have in their armory. It's just part of the whole, part of the package in a way that works better to me. And I obviously mean no disrespect to John to that, because not only is he a friend, but he is unquestionably my favorite songwriter of all time. So, you know, I mean, I'm not doing him down, but it kind of it feels like it's more in the room, you know what I mean? It's not like, oh, we better do one of the bass player's songs. It's kind of like, cool, this is part of the deal. So, you know, I love all the songs. I think it's a really, really strong record, lyrically, musically, politically, you know, and it was kind of cool as well, because it tonally, you know, it's an anarchist record, but it's slightly more kind of grown up than some of their earlier stuff, which I mean in a good way, in the sense that it engages with kind of you know, being jaded and cynicism to a fair degree, and also some pretty kind of interesting specific political points. But like with Friends Like These, Who the Fuck Needs COINTELPRO, I think is an incredible song. You know, and indeed Madeleine Albright Memorial is amazing. Just, what a song, in that line where he's like, you know, I'm punch drunk on the sickening cadence of iron fists and velvet gloves. Sorry, that's COINTELPRO, but in Madeleine Albright, where he says, I drink myself to sleep because I'm losing faith that we here in the cradle of affluence can cease our sickening drive. Do you know what I mean? I could go on.
Oh my God, I know. Yeah. And the opening line of Madeleine Albright is just unbelievable as well. Wadia's best friend's youngest sister was denied a decent burial. For 2 days, they couldn't douse the flames. The Allied planes had showered on her tiny body. Unbelievable line.
It's unbelievable, and nobody writes like that. And actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, because you've really just kind of reminded me how, because that record came out before, either before or during I was in Million Dead, and I definitely feel like Chris's lyrics were a big influence on me in that band, or certainly I wanted them to be. Perhaps it's a slightly more kind of honest way of putting it, you know. And there's a Million Dead song called Bovine Spongiform Economics, which opens with the lines, "The maternity ward where I was born was knocked down in the first Gulf War to build an airport," which is true, but it's also very obviously an attempt to kind of write in his vein.
Awesome.
And I will take my hat off and acknowledge my influences on my sleeve, I guess I should say.
That's amazing. Okay, so let's dive into the title track here, Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes. So this is a lyrically, musically dense song. You mentioned so well just a minute ago. You said this so well, that this is like an intersection of their thrash and and melody.
Yeah.
The song is chorusy, which is rare for them these days, which is amazing. So first I want to talk about the lyrics a little bit. Do you have any favorite lines from this song that really jump out to you, and like what do they mean to you?
Well, I think well, the first thing I'd say is like, I mean, just, you know, as with many propaganda songs, it's just like they're so out there, like in such a good way, just in terms of like, who the hell else is going to open a song? I'm as a writer, I'm obsessed with opening lines, right? I think opening lines are crucial there, where you lay out your market stall for your audience and give them a reason to continue listening to the song and paying attention and so on and so forth. And to open the song with, you know, the tangled webs they weave span from Pine to Ruby Ridge, like nobody fucking does that.
Yeah.
it's just like, it's like a slap in the face. It's like, sit up, pay attention, school is in session, in a good way, you know. And it's also, I mean, as a general direction, I think it's a really, really interesting bit of writing, and it's certainly something that kind of speaks to me politically, in the sense that it's kind of trying to reclaim the anarchist, even sort of slightly libertarian angle of the original American settlement, the white American settlement. Obviously, the lyrics discuss many instances of kind of injustices against Native Americans, and that's hugely important and all the rest of it. But there was this idea of people trying to live in a kind of frontier society that was without government, which I think is really interesting and strong and powerful, and very much runs against the grain of a lot of kind of accepted mainstream American history, Disneyfied history, as the song says. And I think it's a really cool thing to write a song about, because it's really easy to be just facilely like, well, fuck America and fuck the Yanks kind of thing.
Right.
And it's kind of like, well, no, there's elements of their culture that were exciting and interesting and important at certain points. And so on that level, I think that the bit that I love the most, it's certainly the bit I sing along with the hardest when it comes on, is that, you know, the whole, when the backwoodsmen learned of ratification, the people had a coffin painted black and solemnly bore it in a funeral procession and buried it deep in the earth. And that whole section, which interestingly, I've literally just finished one of Joseph J. Ellis's books about the American founding, which included a mention of that source material. So it's historically accurate. And, you know, it's just, yeah, I love that bit of that song. It definitely, like, if it's on in the background at a party and that bit comes on, I'm definitely like, shut up.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's like, listen.
Yeah, and like the original of that I know is from Edness Burke to John Lamb, and he writes like, where's the quote? I have it here. "It is true, the ratification of it was solemnized in our city with splendid procession and shew. We hear from the back country, however, that in some places the people had a coffin painted black, which borne in funeral procession was solemnly buried as an emblem of the dissolution and interment of public liberty." So it's like, it's nearly a quote.
Right. Well, this is one of Chris's great skills as a writer, is his ability to kind of like make essays rhyme, essentially. You know what I mean? There's huge chunks of his writing which survive perfectly well as prose on the page, but also don't feel kind of crowbarred lyrically. Do you know what I mean? They fit and they scan, and it feels good in the song, which is really important as well, because this is music after all, not essay writing.
Right.
But you know that, yeah, it's staggering to realize that it is very nearly a direct quote, and that, you know, what a writer.
I know. So this song has so many historical references. There's Fred Hampton, Vicky and Sam Weaver, Anime Aquash. There's the Pine Ridge standoff, references to U.S. Marshals. There's an allusion to Audre Lorde. How does Propagandi's music and lyrics inspire you, like, as a learner? Because you're a curious dude. I can tell. You read, you care about the world. Like, how do they inspire you to continue learning as you go through your life?
I mean, I would say that, like, it's kind of, I mean, one of the nice things about a band that has such a large catalog is that, you know, there's definitely songs and albums that I know super well and know back to front and don't need to revisit. I mean, I probably will, but, you know, they're in the memory banks. But it's kind of cool, you know, you can just pick up a song from any record pretty much and learn something, and that's kind of cool. Definitely, I think that my own kind of political journey through life was very much kind of influenced by Propaganda, in the sense that, you know, I would hear their songs and go, cool, and then like set out to try and learn about the thing that they were singing about, you know, and educate myself on that level. Yeah, I definitely kind of they have taught me many things about the world, and there's huge. I mean, in fact, this song is quite a good example. I didn't know anything about Pine Ridge until this song, and it was also interesting as well, because like Ruby Ridge, for example, some people have Ruby Ridge down as being a kind of something to do with kind of like survivalists or whatever, or indeed, but essentially right wing kind of white supremacy and all that kind of thing. And it really wasn't that. Do you know what I mean? It was a family living in the woods who wanted to be left alone. And in fact, that's the great tragedy, the great scandal of it, is that this was a peaceable family just trying to live their life out without being interfered with by government. And then the full force of the federal government land on their heads.
Yeah, and and like I was talking about the song to a buddy of mine who plays in another band, and he was like, "Who's Gustafson? What is all this stuff?" So like all these little nuggets and Easter eggs throughout this song are massive stories to dive into. Does the band do that for you as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And again, it is something I can 100% kind of own up to, trying to kind of do my own version of in the lyrics to Million Dead. In honesty, it's something I do less of in my quote unquote solo work. But in Million Dead, I mean, there's endless kind of moments where I'm kind of referencing obscure shit. And I think that the difference between Propaganda and Million Dead is that Chris has this way of doing it that feels welcoming, and it's not alienating. Do you know what I mean? It's like, hey, learn about this stuff, that would be cool and interesting. And the way that I used to do it was very much like, I've read more books than you. You know what I mean? Which is less endearing.
Nice
Should we say? So yeah, I definitely think he's better, infinitely better than I ever was.
Amazing. Okay, so Frank, you make your living playing music professionally with very talented collaborators. Your band, The Sleeping Souls, are filled with marvelous musicians. You've surrounded yourself with fantastic people, and I know that you appreciate the musical dexterity and performance that Propaganda brings to their music as well. I'm curious if you have any specific comments about the performance, the musicianship of Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes that you'd really like to highlight and point out as being special to you as a professional musician yourself.
The first thing I would say is that I can't fucking play it myself. Like, I mean, there's very little of this song that I could actually play, and that is intended as it sounds to be a compliment.
Indeed.
Fuck knows how they do all that sort of that mad twiddly shit. I think that's the technical. I think that's the technical term, is mad twiddly shit. They're incredible musicians. But I guess I'd say one of the things that I enjoy about it more specifically is that there are many different roads to being technical in music. I think that one of the things I like about Propaganda, it's one of the things I like about Converge, actually, who are one of my other favorite bands, is that like it's complex and weird and like confusing and unexpected and all these other things without really necessarily sounding so on the first pass, or at least it doesn't sound like it's just doing it for the sake of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's definitely kind of techie hardcore bands where it's just a bit kind of like, oh, fuck off, I get it. You can play in 19 time. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well done, have a biscuit. And I'm less interested in that as a listener. And similarly, like if you listen to George's drum parts on this song, like they're fantastically complex, and tasteful and subtle and blah, 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 blah. But it's not them doing it just to demonstrate they can. Do you know what I mean? It serves the song at every stage,
right?
Which is, as a writer, I will tell you, is one of the most important things that you can do, is to make sure that whatever you're doing is serving the song.
Yeah.
So it's really, really beautifully and brilliantly played, and the band it meshes. I mean, there's definitely moments in my life where I kind of remind myself that they were, when they made this record, a 3-piece, and that's kind of staggering to me on a lot of levels. Like it certainly sounds like a lot more than 3 people making noise. Like it's the way the bass and the guitar meshes together is phenomenal. It's more than the sum of its parts. There's a lot of kind of complementing going on that's really quite complex.
Do you have any specific gripes about the sound? I know that Chris Hanna is super critical of the guitar recording on this, and he's actually on his Patreon right now talking about trying to fix some of the guitar sounds on the original recordings. Do you have any thoughts on the sound of the record?
I didn't actually know that. Although, I mean, I guess I can see what he's talking about. It's a little bit fizzy in places. A little bit what some friends of mine and I refer to as wasp in a jar. You know what I mean? But not to, it's in a way that I think that personally my ear adjusts to very quickly. And there's also just the thing that at a certain point, you kind of accustomize to how a record sounds if you've heard it a lot, and I don't have an issue with the way the record sounds, let's say that.
How do you rank this record, Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, as a Jord performance? Like, where do you rate this? Like, because like the drums on this record are so impressive to me, and I think that this might be my favorite Jord performance on the entire catalog. Is this particular record from Jord Samolesky?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I'd say that again, like we go back to the graph thing. I think that like they definitely headed into more challenging territory. Technically challenging territory as time went by. But this is, for me, the record where that feels judicious, and I think Jordan's definitely played more complicated stuff, but whether or not it was as soulful or as kind of required for the song, or however you want to put it, is a different question.
Fantastic. Well, Frank, I am so grateful to you for your time and energy being here with me today to nerd out about Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, seeing Propagandy, being a fan of this incredible band. Can you just tell listeners where they can find your work if they want to know more about what it is that you do, if they haven't heard you before?
Well, if anyone's listening to this is not familiar with my work, brace yourself for the fact that most of it doesn't sound anything like Propagandy. But I mean, you can find my stuff by typing my name into Google. I have a website, I have Spotify, and so on and so forth. But also, I think there are various YouTube recordings, like as in live videos of me covering State Lottery on the internet, if anyone's interested in that. Again, doesn't sound anything like the original, not intended to.
Awesome. Well, Frank Turner, thank you so much for coming on Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propagandy. It has been an absolute pleasure having you here. As a fan of your music in particular, it's just a delight for me to have this chance to chat with you.
Thank you very much. I have to say that, like, one of the things about lockdown, obviously I'm locked down with my wife and we haven't seen much of anybody else. I don't often get to nerd out this hard about punk bands at the moment because she's not particularly a punk fan. So it's really, really fun to actually like dive into the minutiae of why I love Propagandy. And I really fucking do.
Yeah, well, and another just quick shout out. My favorite podcast is Going Off Track with Benny Horowitz and Brad Worrell from the Gaslight Anthem, and I think the Goops as well. Loved your appearance on that show. So if anybody out there is listening, looking for a new podcast, go check out Frank on the Going Off Track podcast with Benny and Brad, because it's so freaking awesome.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and Benny and I are old touring buddies, so it was a good catch up.
Awesome. Well, Frank, thank you so much, okay?
A pleasure, man. Lovely to speak to you.
And we are back. So, Keith, we might as well dive right in here to our chat about the tune, because there is far too much to cover in this song in a reasonable amount of time. And I think that we should just go through this thing line by line. But I think it's important to caveat our discussion a little bit. So do you have any like words of caution as people listen to our chat about this song?
There are so many heavy topics here that Greg and I are certainly not experts, but even, moderately read on, that this is not the end of the conversation. And our commentary or our observations, of course, should not be the end point. That hopefully people continue to learn about these historical events here, and to also provide us with feedback if we make a mistake, or we get something wrong, or if our interpretation or our observations aren't necessarily meshing with the rest of the song. So feel free to provide us some feedback and let us know, because we are very aware of the kind of the sensitive and the emotional and historical toll of this track, that we want you to know that we're not pretending to be experts.
Yeah, and it would be completely irresponsible of us to go into this as some kind of authoritative figures. And so we are very aware of our limited understanding of these very complicated topics, which include people's deaths, dying. And so this song is literally about life and death topics. And our research is very limited because we're talking about so many songs from this incredible band, but there are so many references in here that I thought that we should at least touch on each one of them. Because when we first started this show, a friend of mine reached out to me and said, "Who the heck is Gustafson?" And so it was really important to me that we sort of touch on each one of these. But I tell you, man, this is a daunting song to talk about. And I think I've been sort of procrastinating the recording of this episode with you because I was nervous about how many historical references there are in here and how truly novice I am at this. So to all the listeners out there, please understand that we are just learning about these things also. So don't, we're still learning is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, for sure.
So do you think we should just go through this thing line by line a little bit and talk about what the lines mean to us?
Yeah, I think for the first part, the first half at least, that really makes sense. And for me, just right at the beginning, the tangle webs they weave, so much of this song could be understood in just those few words. So, of course, there's the specific incidents later on with the mention of individuals, in government atrocities. Those things can illustrate and inform, but I think like the main idea is here. And, Chris Hanna has said on his podcast that he believes that we live in a de facto white supremacist society, but also the victims of tyrannical, militarized police and government agencies are vast and varied. And while they may differ in their like political ideology or religion or race or sex or their place in time and history, they're united in the fact that police, law enforcement, and other agents want to trip them up or ensnare them in a system of abusive laws and policies as a way to codify state power. And I think that makes sense later on in the line. Sometimes the ties that bind are strange. The mentioned victims of police and state violence are so different, but they have that in common.
Yeah. And, that tangled web is such an awesome metaphor for, keeping people ensnared in a system of law enforcement crackdowns on people who are, maybe standing up for something or maybe just believing that their lives are at risk. Because I was struck by the diverse range of views between the people that Chris wrote about in this song. So they're all different. They all come from different backgrounds, it seems, but they are ensnared in this metaphorical tangled web. So they're the nails who are sticking up, if you will. And it's like captured in the tangled web of law enforcement who, until recently, it seems could act with relative impunity against people in society since smartphones didn't exist to record and capture incidents like the ones that go viral online today.
So let's look at some of the specific examples then. Greg, what did you find out about Pine Ridge and Ruby Ridge?
Okay, so these are a few of the things that I was looking at in that I was talking about when I was making that caveat earlier about these events being extremely complex and very detailed, and the accounts conflict with each other. Obviously, the statements from people on the ground are going to differ from the law enforcement. So I'll start with Pine Ridge, and then I'll go into Ruby Ridge. So Pine Ridge was the site of something called the Wounded Knee incident. Wounded Knee is a very common thing that is known because of what happened there in the 1890s. But in 1973, 200 Lakota seized and occupied the town of Wounded Knee and the Pine Ridge Reservation. And there was a siege, and where two indigenous folks were killed by police. And later on in this song, there is a reference to somebody called Anime. And Anime is Anime Aquash, and I am apologizing if I'm saying her last name incorrectly, but that reference later on in the song, she is a First Nations activist and Mi'kmaq tribal member from Canada, and Anime moved to the States in the 60s and joined other First Nations and Indigenous Americans focused on education and resistance and police brutality against the urban Indigenous peoples of North America. And she was part of the AIM, American Indian Movement. She was present and involved in occupations, and she also participated in the 1973 Wounded Knee incident at the Pine Ridge Reservation in the U.S. So Anime, a couple of years later, was essentially discovered dead and somewhere in the middle of nowhere, I believe, near Pine Ridge. And it was an extremely sketchy death. There were a lot of investigations surrounding it, and I believe that there are multiple theories about it that people can go and check out if they want to.
So how about Ruby Ridge? Because this is going to be pretty different from Pine Ridge.
Yeah, and so Ruby Ridge, the tangle webs they weave span from Pine to Ruby Ridge. So Chris doesn't say Pine Ridge, he says Pine to Ruby Ridge. So there's two ridges here, but these are different. So Ruby Ridge is in Idaho, and this was an incident in 1992 where the FBI, ATF, and U.S. Marshals attempted to seize the home of an arms dealer named Randy Weaver, who came on their radar because he was in attendance at certain Aryan Nations events, and they were like investigating and watching him, etc. So this is a wild story. There was an undercover ATF agent who tried to get Weaver to sell illegal shotguns to them, and he sort of balked, in my understanding. And then they confronted him about having evidence against him, and the ATF, I believe it was the ATF, asked him to help them infiltrate the Aryan Nations, which he refused to do. So there was like then they pressed charges against him for like some gun stuff. His trial date got moved around. He wound up missing some hearings. And then Weaver and his wife, Vicky, got super freaked out that he wouldn't get a fair hearing because of the charges against him. And so he essentially holed up in his house for like a year or something with his family, apparently while under surveillance at various points throughout the year. So here's where it gets really wild. The U.S. Marshals showed up to survey the property in August of 1992, but Weaver's guard dogs started pitching a fit, and the Weaver son and a family friend who both were armed and had guns go out to scope out the perimeter. And during the siege, the accounts differ, but Weaver's wife, Vicky, and son, Sam, wound up being killed by the U.S. Marshals. And the Marshals apparently didn't know that Vicky Weaver had died during the siege. And so, like, when they were outside on the perimeter with Vicky Weaver's dead, shot body inside the house, the Weavers were like on their bullhorns saying, "Hey, Vicky, we have blueberry pancakes out here if you want to come and get them for the family." So like she's dead inside. Yeah. And the U.S. Marshals are like saying her name over the loudspeaker. And the family apparently thinks that they know she's dead. So to them, it sounds like taunting.
Right.
Like, "Hey, Vicky, coming out and get pancakes." But she's dead. So this is like a super wild story where Randy Weaver, his son and wife, were shot dead, and the family wound up getting like millions of dollars of payouts for like these wrongful deaths and stuff. And so, I mean, that was like a wild story to read about today, where I was like eating dinner tonight, eating some quesadillas and reading about the Ruby Ridge standoff. And my wife was like, "Oh my gosh, I remember that." And I mean, it was just a surreal thing to learn about, Pine and Ruby Ridge, which I've been singing along to in this song for years and years.
Yeah.
And really am just kind of digging into for the first time.
Yeah, I just found out that there's a podcast from Slate called Standoff, and the very first season is just about Ruby Ridge, where they break down a different idea every episode. So unfortunately, I didn't find out about it in enough time to maybe share an idea or two. But a takeaway that I have is you can see on just the Wikipedia page for this siege a surveillance photograph of Vicky Weaver that has just an eerie feel to it. And it was the last known photograph that was taken of her before she was killed by a sniper. And I think how you said this is convoluted, not only because of the different narratives and the versions of the story, but since then, of course, like this family has essentially become martyrs amongst the white nationalist movements to where they see them as heroes. And that's definitely dangerous, especially for groups who hope to inspire government violence as a way to incite, a massive civil war. But because, well, this is still a human being, as Chris is clearly singing in here, empathizing, ideology or not, with someone who was killed through, by state power. And ultimately, Randy Weaver received 18 months in prison for, for his crimes that he committed, which, thinking 18 months in prison with 2 family members also killed. I mean, those two things are just so imbalanced that it of course makes me think, like, well, what else could have been done?
Yeah. So going on from there, the song says, way back from Shays' defeat on up to Gustafson. But I'm curious what you found out about Shays' defeat in particular. What is this in reference to in history?
Yeah, this is something I teach about in my classroom. It's a reference to Shays' Rebellion, an uprising that took place in Massachusetts in the 1780s, kind of starting during the Revolution itself and then carrying on after the war was over. And it was led by Daniel Shays, who was an officer during the Revolutionary War. So around this time, like, Massachusetts increased its property requirements for white males to be able to vote. And they also refused to institute, like, beneficial policies to help the struggling, debt-ridden farmers. So Continental soldiers during the war were often paid in paper currency, which later on is essentially worthless by about 1780, just like the war bonds that were used to finance the war. So people have this paper currency and they have these war bonds, but they're worthless, right? And eventually speculators come along to buy them out. So eventually these issued dollars that were used to pay the salaries of soldiers were bought back with gold and silver, but at the rate of $1 for $40 in continental currency.
Oh my God.
Right. So the farmers, many of whom were veterans, refused to pay their rent, like the rent to their landlords. So courts eventually ordered their land and their livestock to be confiscated. So eventually Shays, who had previously quit the military because he wasn't paid, he raises an army of several hundred troops, and they attempt to shut down the courts and seize an armory. So this is squashed, of course, like, this rebellion is put down. There are several members of the uprising who were ultimately hanged. And that Disney-fied history line really hits me here, because these are the issues that arose during the American Revolution and then eventually the War for Independence. And this rebellion, right, against unfair laws and tyrannical government was beaten down by those who orchestrated and organized, under the same pretenses, a rebellion against Britain. But of course, the farmers were not the ruling elite, right? Like the, like the Samuel Adamses or the Thomas Jeffersons, or those who wanted to preserve and maintain like their wealth and power. And it maybe not necessarily about these ideas of, liberty and justice and, like these God-given rights, but it's also about their wealth and their influence being stepped on by British policies.
I'm glad you brought up the farming as well, because the next reference in the song, Gustafson, is also sort of about farming, but it's about grazing rights in Canada.
Okay.
So whenever my buddy asked me, who the heck is Gustafson? So I went looking into that, and I found out that Gustafson isn't a who in this instance, it's a what. And it is the Gustafson Lake standoff. And this was a confrontation in August and September of 1995. So only a few years before this record, Today's Empires, came out in 95, this was a standoff between the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and First Nations people in British Columbia over grazing rights. And it was 31 days long. And it was apparently really wild. Police fired about 77,000 counted rounds of ammunition.
Holy smokes.
They disabled a supply pickup with buried explosives. And apparently they also killed somebody's dog.
Wow.
So the Gustafson Lake standoff, growing up in Missouri, I never heard about this thing. I was 12 years old when that happened.
Right.
And growing up in the States, like, you don't hear about stuff like this that takes place in Canada because we are so inwardly obsessed with ourselves that, like, growing up, we don't actually hear about other places. So the Gustafson Lake standoff has a really awesome documentary on Netflix. Not on Netflix, holy smokes. On YouTube, you can just search Gustafson Lake standoff, and there's about, like, it's called Gustafson Lake standoff in 5 minutes. And it's a really cool little short documentary that was made about the event that I would encourage everybody to go and check it out. So this line is so brilliant. Way back from Shays to Feet on up to Gustafson.
Yeah.
And it's like a bookended tragedies involving U.S. and Canadian enforcement.
Right.
So then we have the next slide, which is hysterical. Now cue the ass parade of ditto heads and commissars and pricks to drown out the faintest threat. And what I like here about this ditto heads thing is that you look and see what the president of the United States says today, and then you turn on Fox News and or OAN or whatever it's called, and you watch his ditto heads.
Yeah.
You're like, yeah. And so that's all I can think about is the ass parade of ditto heads in the White House and on Fox News and on OAN. And I love the next thing. I'm not gonna use the LGBT slur here, but it's a way of vilifying people that is so effectively done to make outsiders look like freaks.
Yeah.
And it really leads into the next line that says, the conclusion is that the nail that sticks up gets hammered down and the master's finest tools are found. And this is a reference to Audre Lorde, who famously wrote an essay titled "The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House." Did you find anything out about that particular line that I just kind of went through a little bit?
Yeah, I always thought it was just a Born Against reference since they have a song with the same name. But it actually is also a Japanese proverb that I also use in my class as a quote of the week right about this time that we're talking about Shays Rebellion, actually.
Yeah, and and then it says that slack-jawed and placid amidst the cacophony of screaming billboards and Disney-fied history. I mean, the state is strengthened essentially by apathy of citizens. So, like, this citizenry have been made passive by being bombarded by, like, advertising, whitewashing of history. And I was so bummed after my interview with Frank Turner, because the one question that I wish that, like, in retrospect, looking back, I wish I would have asked him. I wish I would have said, Frank, what Disney-fied history do you think is most damaging?
Yeah.
Do you have any examples of things that, like, jump out at you about being Disney-fied that really, like, felt like a betrayal to you whenever you got a little older? Because mine's like Columbus and all that nonsense.
Yeah, I just think the myth of American exceptionalism that I'm still unpacking and still breaking down, that it's not just about ideas in history, whether it's manifest destiny or the divine founding of our nation, like God ordained it to be created to make something better. But I think as a result of that, like, this instilled belief or system of beliefs that make Americans, as a result, think of themselves as being uniquely better. And so much of that comes from those terrible interpretations of history, and everything kind of gets oversimplified if you're in a class, a lecture that only has so much time, right? And if it's elementary school or middle school, but I spend so much time specifically on the American Revolution, and I try to help kids understand, well, how revolutionary was it, right? And we really look at evidence to say, before and after, what changed. And, in a lot of ways, if you go far enough in history, a lot changed. But in the immediate uh, wake of the American Revolution, enslaved people are still enslaved. Women did not have the right to vote, and indigenous communities are being destroyed. As much as we might like to say that it is the first time you have something like a constitution that says that people have unalienable rights that cannot be taken away, it didn't really mean much on the ground for the people who are, the victims of progress.
Yeah. Well, and this song goes back into these lines of no justice shines upon the cemetery plots marked Hampton, Weaver, or Anime, where federal bureaus and fraternal orders have cast their shadows. And that is an absolutely beautiful line about an absolutely tragic topic. And first of all, it's hearkening back to the first few lines in the song, because Hampton, Weaver, Anime. So we have Vicky Hampton from Ruby Ridge, who died and whose dead body was just sitting inside that house for a few days. And then Anime Aquash from Pine Ridge. And I think about, the one that we're living through, the example that we're living through right now is the ongoing calls for the arrest and prosecution of the murderers of Breonna Taylor. And, where's her justice? It's like the no justice shines upon the cemetery plots marked Breonna Taylor, know? And that's what's bringing it up to me right now, is the fact that there's so much of this that has happened. How many lives have been just ended flippantly and flagrantly over the years because of these, these law enforcement acts of aggression.
Yeah, I think it's amazing that a song that is so dense with historical references can still be eloquent and poetic. And I think of something else Fred Hampton wrote in Power Anywhere, Where There's People. He said, quote, "A lot of people get the word revolution mixed up, and they think revolution's a bad word. Revolution is nothing but like having a sore on your body, and then you put something on that sore to cut that infection, to cure that infection." And I'm telling you that we're living in an infectious society right now. I'm telling you that we're living in a sick society. And anybody that endorses integrating into this sick society before it's cleaned up is a man who's committing a crime against the people.
Oh my goodness. Well, and there we should talk about who Fred Hampton was. He was a Black Panther. He was murdered by police while sleeping in his home during a raid on his Chicago apartment by a team of Chicago police officers in collusion with the Cook County Attorney's Office and the FBI. This was in 1969, and a fellow Black Panther named Mark Clark was also killed. Police fired over 90 rounds, injuring 4 other Black Panthers who reportedly fired a shotgun one time. So there was a 90-1 shot ratio. And interestingly, there were revelations about the illegal COINTELPRO program that came out later, which is referenced in another tune on this album that we'll be discussing in a totally different episode. So don't be surprised if Fred Hampton shows up in a subsequent episode. But, these documents associated with this killings, and many scholars now widely consider Hampton's death to be an assassination under an FBI initiative. So it's a pretty dense story in and of itself too.
Yeah, and going back to the line that you said, the faintest threat of commie heretics, whether it was Hampton suspected of being a communist, or the same thing happening with Martin Luther King Jr. and other members of the civil rights movement, how we still have this like cartoonish fear today of communism and socialism somehow like overturning the United States. I mean, seeing earlier, um, a flag hanging outside a home that just said socialism sucks, or recently in Pennsylvania where politicians are just campaigning, and their campaign identity or their sloganeering is just what they're not. It's not what they are. It's just trying to show that, make themselves the opposite of this like fabricated straw man cartoonish fear that has like made its way back into like the collective like political and like cultural memory.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild the amount of ideas and thoughts and events that propaganda is able to throw into such a dense bit of songs. I mean, this is a quickly sung tune. It's really, really impressive when you think about Chris's skill of delivering this. There's another reference in the song that I wanted to bring up, and this is from a letter from a figure, a guy named Adanus Burke, to a person named John Lamb in 1788. And so we have this line that says, "The truth is, when the backcountry learned of ratification, the people had a coffin painted black, and solemnly borne in funeral procession, they buried it deep in the earth as an emblem of the dissolution and internment of their public liberty." So this is a reference that Chris Hanna threw in, and here's the original version, which is that letter from Burke to Lamb. "It is true, the ratification of it was solemnized in our city, when with splendid procession and shew. We hear from the back country, however, that in some places the people had a coffin painted black, which borne in funeral procession was solemnly buried as an emblem of the dissolution and internment of public liberty." So I don't have a deep understanding of the context of that letter, of what was going on. But I mean, that is really incredible to find a reworked letter from 1788, revised and slid into this song, and then connecting that so seamlessly between Fred Hampton, the Weavers, Pine Ridge, Ruby Ridge. I mean, this is really just a magnificent piece of writing.
Yeah, one other line that I want to share at least is permanent features built into these borders. And for me, it's overwhelming to think about how much of our lives are dictated by imaginary things. Like, Ibram X. Kendi refers to race as a mirage, right? It's a social construct born out of the Enlightenment's craze to categorize and to classify everything in the natural world. But it's made up, right? It's a mirage that has come to define like the world that we live in. And in the same way, borders, nation states, and the governments that we give power to, like in a way, to me, seem just as arbitrary. Like, how you always mention living just across the border from Hamilton or Toronto, and as a result, how different your life is because of this imaginary border that separates you.
Yeah, well, and when I lived in Mexico in 2007 and 2008, how I was living on the other side of this line that is so obsessively discussed in, American culture or whatever. But what happened is, like, there are people living in that portion of the country who the border crossed them. They didn't cross the border. And so now there's this massive disconnect and this like infighting over something that, like, oh, you're in the USA, you should say XYZ. And it's like, dude, we were here first. Like, come on. So anyway, that's just as another thing that just randomly pops up about the imaginary nature of borders, but
Right.
also conquest, empire,
Mhm.
and the way that colonization springs forth. And speaking of colonization, I live in Western New York now, and today I went to a place called Ganondagan, which is the historic site of the birthplace of the Iroquois Nation. And I got
Mhm.
into an amazing conversation with a woman who works there, talking about the history of those exact topics. And it was a powerful and moving moment for me, hearing the real stories of people who were here, and who the empire essentially attempted to crush, and yet they
Mhm.
survived nonetheless.
Mhm.
So that's kind of like a nice little connection that I had personally in my life today before we recorded this episode. So I thought that was
Nice.
pretty perfect.
Nice.
Do you want to should we talk about the music a little bit here in this bad boy?
Yeah, let's switch it up.
All right, so tell me a little bit about let's start with guitars. Tell me about guitars on this song for you, because I want to focus on one thing. So I'm going to have
Yeah.
you focus on a few things, and then we're going to get into what I want to talk about.
For sure. Yeah, I think what is most notable for the guitars is like the majority of it, from my ears at least, you guys know I'm not a musician, is that it seems to be the same three power chords, but with just a lot of variation. There's different strumming patterns, there are different tempos, as well as like those really cool picking patterns that bring a lot of life out of those same three chords that kind of are carried throughout the song. And I really like that picking style that you kind of have in the middle of the track. You hear the same thing on Mate Ka and Natural Disasters and a few other songs on this album, which always, like, that's what I hear when someone brings up Today's Empires, the album. I always hear like that really cool melodic chord picking technique that's done throughout the song. And so I think it's like relatively simple, the guitars at least, compared to what Chris and the Beav are doing later on in Supporting Cast and Failures. But it works really well because there's just so much happening lyrically
Yeah.
that it makes it a little bit easier to digest in a way. And the melodies and overall, in a way, have this uplifting and hopeful quality
Mm-hmm.
that you would almost think it would sound a lot darker, like something off of Failed States, despite all the references and ideas about, murderous government. I think the band here kind of really believed that there was no way for this modern empire to continue, that collapse would be inevitable, and that there's like this kernel of hope for change, that being amplified by these melodies sounding, I think, really positive.
Yeah, well, and I think that my conversation with Frank Turner was touching on that a lot, because Frank was talking about how unbelievable the melodies in
Mhm.
this song are, and that's one of the main reasons why it latches onto him so much, because it's just such a memorable
Mhm.
tune. I mean, you can't get it out of your head when you hear this thing. And like, you'd have to really focus on like learning the lyrics to be able to really sing along with it a lot. But the melody is so good. So yeah, that's another thing that I agree with you on.
Yeah,
What else?
I was gonna say with the lyrics that I think it's interesting how hard they would be to sing and to learn, and how fast it is. Like, I've had this album since 2003, and I could still kind of mumble along like my brother listening to rap albums driving to school in high school, like acting like he knows all the words, but he can't really because it's so fast. But then it is almost sing along, right? It's so fast, but then like the nail that sticks up
Yeah.
gets hammered. Like, that's like you can really hold on to and sing along to. And I think those vocal patterns and phrases, there's such a contrast between them, and they're both really successful.
Yeah. So the bass on this song is fantastic. Josh, who we had on the Resisting Tyrannical Government episode, I have vivid memories of sitting in his apartment on, oh gosh, I can't remember the name of his street, but it was in St. Louis, just off of the Del Mar Loop, just behind Vintage Vinyl Record Store. But I remember sitting in his apartment in front of his little MacBook white plastic computer with the song blaring over his speakers in his bedroom and just playing along
Yeah.
this song on the bass. And it's a ripper, man. What did you think about the bass on this song?
Yeah, I think Todd helps maintain like this driving pulse of the track. The bass is kind of thumping as it follows the guitars a lot. And we talked a little bit on the Back to the Motor League episode about how Chris dislikes the production and the guitar tones on today's Empires. And I've seen that sentiment echoed by some fans, while others are like, it has a unique sound and I love it. But kind of regardless, I think this song shows how well Todd balances out sort of those tinny guitar tones with a much needed low end bass.
Well, speaking about Chris's commentary about the guitar sound on Empires, that's another reason why people should join his Patreon, because he is talking about ongoing projects related to the master tapes of Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes relatively frequently on his Patreon page. And he's got a lot of people over there pretty excited about what he's trying to pull off, because I think he's trying to massively change a few of the guitar sounds in that record, which could be immensely exciting, especially for super fans, like people who love this record anyway. Like I would listen to this record constantly, and I don't care what the guitars sound like at this point, because to me that's just the record now.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm like, what is Chris envisioning that can make this insane piece of work even better? How can he do it? So anyway, that's something that's got me thinking a lot. So I'm going to talk about the drums here for a second.
I knew it.
So first of all right, I'm just going to lay down some truth here for a second. I almost cannot even conceive of a Propaganda fan who doesn't love this song.
Yeah.
It, like, in my mind, I can't allow myself to believe that a person who is a fan of this band doesn't like this song. Like, that person can't exist. That's just in my head, obviously. So if you don't like this song and you're listening to me say this right now, feel free to tell me, because you will blow my mind. So everybody knows this song slays. So instead of doing like an instrument by instrument breakdown here, I am all in on the drumming in this song, and I'm just going to fawn over Jord for a minute. For the sake of brevity, I could talk about the other instruments too, but you covered them very well. So the drums are the standout thing to me on this track. The drums start this song. Da-da-da-da-da. And I feel like Empires is the record where Jord really started like laying into those China hits. Oh my gosh. I feel like he accents things so well with these really hard China cymbal, just slamming, bashing crashes. Think about the China that he bashes on, gets hammered down, and fraternal orders. And he's just back there going, bah, 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 just really laying into those Chinas. And it's just so perfect to me. And I think this is like, I don't really remember Jord doing that before this record. So I think that's like a new addition to his toolbox that he laid into on this record. But man, when he hits that China on Gets Hammered Down, I could be driving and I am air drumming those China hits, man, every time. And after Chris sings Hampton, Weaver, or Anime, Jord does that little fill on the snare where it's like da 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 da. And oh man, dude, I love that, because as a dorky, skinny punk rock drummer trying to play like Scott Raynor from Blink-182 on Dude Ranch, Scott Raynor was really well known for just going as fast as he could, and then these these just really fast drum rolls. So this record showed me that drum fills on a drum set don't have to be just It can be,
Yeah.
and it like introduced me to other concepts like paradiddles and stuff like that you learn if you're like a percussionist in like a marching band. But like Jord really showed me on songs like this what is possible on a drum set. So I love that. And let's see. And then he breaks in between hits leading into where federal bureaus and fraternal orders tried. And I tried so hard to emulate in bands over the next several years what Jord was doing on this kind of song. And like he's got so much drum flair and character. And there's like those 3-beat bop 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 cymbals under the 3-syllable word history at about the 1:15 mark in this song. And it just it makes me so happy that the drumming is following the emphasized syllables in the lyrics.
Yeah.
Think about the amount of thought and preparation and fine tuning and honing that you would have to do as a band in rehearsals for Jord to think history is 3 syllables. I can do bop 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 on my drums and I can follow the vocals, and we can really just have that be a little moment of flair, if you will, for any Office Space fans out there. I love the drums under the bombs bursting in air because like they follow the lyrics so well. It's like Jord is singing to me through a drum set. So go Jordy, holy moly, you blow my mind on this freaking song.
Yeah, I don't think I realized how intense the drums were until I really started to like listen and try to think of a couple things to say for it, especially since at first there's like that sustained punk beat throughout a lot of it.
It sounds
And
super straightforward, doesn't it?
Yeah, and just like the power chords. But then if you really listen, there's so much, flair, like you said. There's so much technique added in. There's splashes that seem to come like after the beat. There are those like really cool fills and cymbals that accentuate the lyrics. There's like a stutter step sometimes. I don't know how to describe it, where it's not complete, like you said with the fills. And one of my favorite parts is how like after all of this blasting, the song ends with this controlled, soft outro. To me, that's just like as emotional as the rest of the music.
Love it. So this is a banger, man. And I feel like Jord is like, that Jord is so good on this song. I just think that this is such a standout record for Jord in general. But man, I was listening to this song like 5 times today, and I just kept picking up on new moments in the drums. Like, did he really just make those hits in line with a 3-syllable word? And like, I just like couldn't believe the new things that I was hearing as I was like preparing for this episode. I was like, God, all this stuff was hiding in plain sight, and the song would just not be what it is without it.
So I watched the drum cover on YouTube to help just kind of visualize it. And then I saw a comment from you underneath that was a couple months old, I think.
Oh my God. I lose it for the drums on this song.
Yeah.
And it starts from the first second.
Right.
I just can't believe the drumming on this song. And I'm sorry if that sounds nerdy, and I'm sorry if there's drummers out there listening who are like, what do you mean this song is better on the drums, that song's better on the drums? But man, there's just something about this one that I think this was like a personal turning point for me as a young person, 17, 18 years old when this record came out. And I was like trying to figure out why I sucked so hard on the drums. And then something like this comes out, and I was like, I have 25 new ideas all of a sudden.
That's cool.
Because of Jord, So did you find any cool YouTube comments or anything about this tune?
Yeah, I found a couple. I saw the only good nation is imagination.
Awesome. What else?
Another comment, I kind of just took a part of it. It said, this song is really the sweet spot for me. Raw enough to be potent and nuanced, intelligent enough to warrant many repeat listening sessions. And the last one is, tomorrow may be here.
Okay. So I have an extension on that one. So you just said tomorrow may be here. So today's Empire's tomorrow's ashes. So tomorrow may be here. So someone in a different video said in response to someone. So somebody wrote tomorrow's ashes, right? So somebody wrote tomorrow's ashes, and then somebody replied, today it is.
Yeah.
And it took my breath away a little bit. You know what I mean? And then another one that I found said, rest in power, Comrade Hampton, fist in the air. Your legacy will not be forgotten. So it's cool to see people recognizing the mentions of who's in this tune. So let's talk about some concluding thoughts here. What does this song teach you, make you think about in the world? Like they kind of like put a nice bow on this.
Yeah, so I recently read America, the Farewell Tour by Chris Hedges, and he said something that initially brought up like my guard. I got a knee-jerk defensiveness sitting just reading this, and he makes it a point a few times in the book to argue that white racists, the far right, and other ideological bad actors are also victims. They're victims of environmental destruction, of government abuse, of eviction, debt, the dismantling of civil liberties, soaring healthcare costs, and wage stagnations, all in a system that celebrates corporate profit and consolidated power. So I see this song as like a long form version of the lyric. So why don't we start making a history worth being proud of and start fighting the real fucking enemy? From the only good fascist is a dead fascist. So, thinking back to like the slack-jawed lyric, complacency and ignorance are tools of the state, and the constant distractions of not only pop culture, but of abuse of power, one after another. It's kind of hard to even keep track of everything that's happening with this administration because it's also overwhelming. It creates so much intentional noise that I think it feels sometimes just futile to pay attention, kind of like scooping water out of a sinking boat with a spoon. But if we really want there to be substantial change, there has to be rebellion. It's probably has to get worse. And also, like Fred Hampton said in that same speech, quote, but Martin Luther King said that he heard somewhere that only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. We're not worried about it being dark.
Man, and that complacency line that you just mentioned a minute ago reminds me of something that Chris Hanna was just tweeting about relatively recently. And I went back and I found his tweet, and it's about like mask pandemic conspiracy theorists. And Chris wrote, the conspiracy theory is so self-aggrandizing anyways. Like we weren't already 100% docile and compliant sitting in front of our laptops, binge watching Netflix, hockey, drinking beers, going to shows, buying crap online, et cetera, et cetera. Give me a break.
Yeah. Right.
So the docility is very, very real in us. So this song makes me think about impermanence. And from my other podcast, I talk a lot about Buddhism with Buddhists. And so like I get the thought of impermanence thrown at me a lot. Like every flower dies, all leaves fall, every roadway crumbles, every mighty airplane rusts and is scrapped. And I think about the closing line of this tune, and someday, somewhere, today's empires, tomorrow's ashes. And I think about how horrible people are in so many ways. A lot of people are good too. I'm gonna, concede that. But we're so horrible in so many ways, and how we don't deserve so many of the things we have, and how we have the ability to make so much progress and we don't, and how through certain folks' inabilities to realize that all people deserve dignity, health, shelter, well-being, we still careen towards our inevitable crumbling. And it seems so obvious to me, so many things that should be done, and yet we like moan and complain about it all the way there. And some people just fight every single step towards dignity for all people. It blows my mind. That such a large percentage of our population is hell-bent on moving as quickly as possible in the opposite direction of a dignified world where we're stewards of our earth, where we achieve equality for all, and we punish new families with no guaranteed paid leave. Like, we watch our wages stagnate to like where folks in their 30s or 40s are making what their parents made in the 90s or worse. You know, where people go bankrupt and get $1 million healthcare bills for contracting freaking COVID, where children are allowed to die in their school classrooms year after year after year, and because of some phantom concept that we latch onto and cling to, even though people die from it. Like, this to me is indicative of a failed state and an empire that deserves failure in so many ways. And like, the only reason I can't stand the thought of it failing completely is because my kid has to live here, you know,
Yeah.
till I can maybe get her out someday.
Mm.
And so I'm watching what I see as this crumbling happening all around me. And all I can think of is, holy smokes, I have this young person that I got to get out of here somehow. And it freaks me out, man. Oh.
Give me a rating.
5.
Give me 5.
It's
5.
an utterly perfect song to me. It's I can't conceive of anything lower than a perfect score on this one.
Yeah, I'm doing 5 as well, back to back, just like Back to the Motor League. And if you asked me, I think a couple years ago, without really thinking about a lot of these ideas and learning a little bit more, I might have said a 3 or a 4. But yeah, I'm definitely going with a 5.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, that's our episode on today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, track 3 from the 2001 full length, today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes. Thanks again to Frank Turner and Ian Legge and Emilie Plamondon for your participation in this episode. We are so thrilled to have you. If you would like to follow us on social media, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at PropagandyPod. And thank you so much for listening, for all of your support. This has been such an amazing journey for both of us so far. And Keith, I don't mean to speak for you here, but man, this has been just so unbelievably cool, hasn't it?
It's been awesome. Yeah, it's been awesome.
So we will see you next time, all of our friends. Thanks so much for listening.